I've been a professional illustrator for over 10 years, and I am the award-winning and best-selling author of How to Draw Adorable. I have actually never been traditionally published, but I'm correcting that, and in about a couple weeks, my book, Even Yetis Get Colds, which I wrote and illustrated, is coming out, and I would like to tell you guys about how I went down this path to be traditionally published, so that hopefully you can help you on your goal for publishing as well. The route to publishing. So I'm going to be telling this story and advice from the perspective of someone that wants to illustrate and write their own stuff. However, I do think it definitely applies to someone who wants to write their own as well and not just illustrate, because the illustrating and writing is really just an additional step. The story for me about Even Yetis Get Colds started because I was drawing this Yeti character. So I've actually been drawing him for over a decade. I think I started drawing him, I definitely started drawing him when I worked at Disney making games. It was my very first illustration job, and he was based on a friend of mine. And I just kept drawing him throughout the years, and he sort of like morphed into his own sort of character, and just been like a character design that I've gone back to over and over again. For me, writing in general, I have noticed, usually comes from a character design, and I love the character so much that I end up making a story to go along with it. This isn't everybody's process, but I've heard that's pretty common for people who like to illustrate, that it starts there, like it starts with a drawing or with a character, and then the story sort of develops from it. It's definitely not the only way that it can be. You can definitely have an idea for a story, and then the characters then come out of that. But for me, everything that I've always done with art has always been really character driven anyway, that it makes sense for that to be my process. And to be honest, the stories that I like to read and the films that I would like to watch are often very character based anyway. Like if they don't have a good cast of characters, I get kind of disinterested. So for me, that makes sense that that's my process. But if that's not your process, it's totally okay. So I had basically this Yeti in mind, and I really love stories that have two characters that play against each other. And the two characters I love when they're very different from each other. So we have Yeti, who's like this gigantic fuzzy Yeti, and we have his best friend Coco, who's a little girl. And so Yetis might seem formidable and large and kind of scary, but he's actually a big softy at heart. And then we have the little tiny girl who's spunky and has a really big personality. So we have that contrast of characters that we can make a story upon. And that's really what I like to do with most of the stories that I write, is have two opposing characters and put them into situations, and they'll react different to each situation, which causes fun times and shenanigans. The way that I ended up writing the story was I had these two characters, and then I believe what happened, because I knew that I wanted to write an illustrated children's book, and I wanted to do it with these two characters. I was participating in an illustration contest with the School for Visual Storytelling, and their prompt was everything was falling apart and breaking, and I was like, I was using those prompts every month to build my portfolio, and I just decided for that month that it would be fun to use my Yeti character for it, to sort of build something that could go in my portfolio and to draw him. And so I ended up making this illustration, which is actually right smack dab in the center of the book, where he sneezes, and it's the beginning of the storm, because literally it's a snowstorm, because when he sneezes it snows. That sort of sets the book into motion of all the shenanigans. And I had illustrated this, and it just sparked this entire story about what happens when Yetis get colds and how we would handle that. And so I remember at this time period, I was working full time, and I have two little kids, and I have very little time to do any work at all. And so I asked my husband that night to put the kids to sleep, and I drove to a parking lot outside of a Starbucks that I think was even closed. It was like like 9 p.m. In like a notebook that was like a planner, I wrote the story, and I didn't have my computer. I didn't do any editing. I just started the story from the top, like here's Yeti and here's his best friend, and I intertwined this idea of him getting cold, and I just wrote it like that. The reason why I wrote it that way is because I was a really big fan of Neil Gaiman, and that was one of the tips that he gave when he writes novels, is to put yourself in a situation where there's no distractions and you give yourself the opportunity to either write or do nothing. And I do this also with my art. I can either draw or do nothing. And it sort of takes that pressure off of having to draw or having to write and makes it feel like, okay, well, it gives me that sort of like self push that this actually is what I want to do and I'm not being forced by myself. I don't know. It's a weird mind trick. And the second reason is that then you start writing or illustrating without editing. So it'd be sort of the same as deciding to draw with pen, which is another thing that I love to do. Instead of drawing with pencils, I like to draw with pen because I can't fix my mistakes. I can just draw and see what happens. And then if it doesn't work, then I just come up with a new idea. And so that's what I did with this. I just wrote it from start to finish. And then after I wrote it from start to finish with pencil in my notebook, actually with pen in my notebook, I went home and then I edited the story. I laid the story out with all of the pages. So it's a 32-page board book. So on this first page are these words. On the second page will be these words. On the third page will be these words. And I laid it out like that. And that was sort of like the first step, which is my manuscript. So I would like to show you how sketchy I actually draw when I'm coming up with ideas. So no judgments of my sketchbook, okay? This is a judgment-free zone, okay? But this is the level of quality. Here's the size of my hand. The level of quality and size of my illustrations that I draw with. So this page, I actually wasn't doing thumbnails here. I was just drawing the character in different situations to see what it would look like. So what would it look like if he's making ice cream, if he's on the beach hanging out, if he's ruined a tea party. Many of these things are actually in the final book. I'm trying to show you some. He's really caring, so he was like going after some little duckies there to try and get them out of the rain. And here's some more. So you can see these are not these are not masterpieces. These are scribbles, and these are done in pen on, I don't know why, but I love drawing on like these watercolor type sketchbooks just in case I suddenly decide I want to paint them, I can. And we can see that in the end, those tiny little sketches become something like this, where we see him in his little ice cream, making some ice cream on the beach, because that's what he does. He's like it. And ruining a tea party. See? And so those early little sketches that I done actually did end up becoming part of the book later on. Now you have a manuscript. How do you get that into a book? So the next step that you need to do is you take your manuscript and you're going to create a book dummy. So I'll walk you through the steps to creating a book dummy. In my script, it says something like page 1 and the text that goes on page 1. Like even like having a Yeti as a best friend is the best. And then on page 2, the next text, etc. And I lay it out that way with text to get an idea, but it's not set in stone, of how I want the page to flow. And the reason I do that is because I found if I don't, I'll lay out the text and then I'll have like 3 pages worth of text at the end of my book that I need to figure out. So that helps me just generally lay it out so that I get the pacing of the book figured out. And then I do thumbnails. And I'm going to show you guys exactly what the thumbnails for this book looks like. So this will probably make very little sense. This here was my title page with my Yeti. And then I had set a scene here. And then here is where she is saying, you know, that there's just one, I think the text here is, there's just one big problem. And to be clear, when I'm drawing these thumbnails, it is about this size on my screen as I'm drawing them. I'm keeping it very small. This is the amount of detail in the drawing. You get the expression and you get the idea that this is kind of like shaded in, so it might be kind of big and a little bit scary. And we're doing like a mystery moment here. And I think the text here is, there's just one problem, and just like Yeti, it's a big one. So we're like making it seem all moody. And then we find out he gets a cold. And then so I basically do that. And often I'll even leave space in these tiny little thumbnails to sort of indicate that there's gonna be text. So on this one right here, I have the image and I've indicated that there's gonna be some text right there. And then here, there's gonna be text there and there. Now this is a good example of the fact that these thumbnails are not final. When I got to actually doing at the book, this image here, which right now is just half a page, when in the final ended up being a full page spread. So it will definitely shift, but this is sort of my first pass at figuring out what's going to happen on each page and how the story is going to progress. This also, one of the things I'm looking for at this stage, is it going to be a half page image illustration with the text, or am I going to do 2 small spot illustrations, or am I going to do a full page spread? So that's what I'm figuring out here. I'm figuring out not just what text with which illustrations on which page, but how I'm going to break up those illustrations for it to make sense. And then after I have that, now I'm going to do rough illustrations. And the key here is that they are rough. I think a big mistake I see most illustrators make is that they make them too detailed and too clean too early, and so they can't fix mistakes because they put so much time and energy into doing it. So for example, the one that I was just showing you, this is the rough drawing that I put in the dummy that went to a publisher. This is as detailed and clean that it ended up being. This, too rough. But this, okay, that's allowed. We're okay with that. We can see the expression, we understand what these images are in the scene, and we know what the text is. I made a book dummy with all of the rough illustrations and each art on each page, and I just made this into a PDF. And then the best practices for making a book dummy is to make sure that you have at least 1, and then up to 2, maybe 3 images that are fully clean, exactly what you want the final illustration to look like. I'll show you an example of my book. This is what it looked like. So that way when a publisher or agent or whatever is looking at it, they know what the final product of your book will look like, because there's one clean one, which is why you can get away with all of those rough illustrations on all of the other pages. I should have done more pages, but I'm lazy. So I probably should have done an extra page and it would have made my life easier later, but you know, yeah. Anyways, when you have your book dummy, you can then apply to agents, and if you're an illustrator, have your book dummy and your portfolio. If you're just a writer, you would just have your manuscript, and you send that to an agent and hopefully get them to take you on and to publish you. If you want to know more about making agents, I would check out my agent video. And if you want to know more about illustrating the children's book itself, once you get past this book dummy page, I would check out my children's book illustration video, because I do like a full recorded video of me illustrating a book for a self-published author. After you get an agent, then they will put your book on what's called submission. So they take your book dummy, if you're a children's book author, illustrator, or just your manuscript if you're a writer, and they send that to publishers. And mine had like a list of people that they sent, and they would sort of give them a certain amount of time to reply to whether or not they like the book or not. And if they don't, or they pass on it, or no one responds after a certain amount of time, then they let them know, hey, I'm gonna send it to some more people. I think with Yeti, we went through maybe 3 rounds of that, and then someone decided to pick it up, which was Pixel Ink, who's my publisher. I agreed to work with them. And so at that stage, when I signed the contract with Pixel and Ink, I only had the book dummy. So I had 1 finished illustration, and then all of the work, the rough drawings, and the manuscript figured out. At that point, after we signed our contracts, they went through and did an editing pass to let me know if there was any changes that they wanted me to make from my dummy. There was very little, because they're wonderful and amazing and really believed in me and really loved what I was doing. But there were some like text edits or suggestions and that kind of thing, which I really appreciated. And I made those edits, and we sort of went back and forth, and then I had like approved text pretty much, and I just went through and did a clean line drawing pass of my book. So I'll just show you on Procreate here. The file got big enough that I couldn't do everything in a single file, so it's spread up. So even my clean lines, I have here I have like clean lines pages 1 through 4 and clean lines pages 8 through 10. Like, so I had a couple different files to do the clean line work. The rough I was able to fit into a single file, but not for clean line. And so here's that same illustration with clean line work. And so I did the whole book like this with clean lines, so that it was pretty clear to them what was going to definitely appear in each page, and I could get edits. Again, there was very little for me at this stage, but there was definitely some helpful edits throughout. And once those were approved, I did final color. And the way I personally did it was I gave them like a 90% done version that they could layout with text. And then I did like my little tiny edits, like the extra little snowflakes or a little bit of extra shading, stuff that wouldn't make a big change, but that I could work on while they were doing their editing. It was just something I did for myself to save time. I'm not sure you're supposed to do that. But there is some time, like when they get the illustrations and they need to put text there, that they were working on it, and I was also working on it. I will say that the way I personally work is that I like to lay out the text with the art just to make things easier when it goes to design, that I already know there's enough space for everything. Not all artists do that, not all artists have to do that, but it's my process. So for example, on that one page that I told you, because I had been laying out my own text, I got to do some fun, playful text throughout the book. So for example, on the page I was just showing you, we ended up making the word big really big and in my own handwriting. So there's only one problem, and just like Getty, it's a big one. And so we could have some sort of fun, playful text throughout the book. That's what the final illustration ends up looking like. And so yeah, so I really like working that way, but again, not everyone does, and you don't really have to. It's fine. And then after I had done that, I was also working on the cover, and that was a very similar process. I sent them rough illustrations. Here, I'll show you my thumbs. Yeah, so this is the original thumbnails that I sent them for the cover. And you can see that I've labeled them A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Highly recommend you do that. So it makes them giving you feedback really, really easy, because they can be like, we liked, I think they literally did this, like, we like A, but mixed with B. And otherwise it gets really complicated to explain. So highly recommend you always label them. And so they gave me their feedback, and I made edits. They improved the clean and then the final color. And I made sure there's room for the designer to put text in there, and they did the text for me. And I also did the back cover when they were working on that, and then also these little inside pages. But all of this stuff, like the jacket stuff, this little illustration, these things I did later on in the process. I didn't do those until I had an agent. Until I had the publisher. They were like, hey, we need stuff for the cover. And so then I gave it to them. And then after approvals, after they got all the edits and the text in, they would send it to me, and I could give feedback on like font and design placement. Then they go to print it. It usually takes at minimum 3 months for a book to get printed. So usually your deadlines are about usually 6 months or so to a year before it actually gets published, just so you have an idea of time frame. And then I've just been waiting. I've been waiting since I don't know, February, March for my book to come out, and it's gonna come out next month. I'm really excited. So yeah, okay, that's how I went from idea to final product. And they sent me about 20 copies. So I'm gonna have some signed copies available on my website. If you want to grab one, they are available now anywhere books are sold. If you want to support my book, I would love you. I should probably tell you what it's about. Let me see. This says what it says on the jacket. It says, having a Yeti as a best friend is, well, the best. There's always laughter and adventure, and you're guaranteed to have the best seat in the house. Except for one big problem. And just like Yeti, it's a big one. I just didn't say that. Every year, Yeti gets a cold, and when he does, he turns into a total grump. So this year, Coco's going to be ready. She's got lots of sweaters and blankets and cocoa, but finding a cure is a lot harder than it sounds. So that's what my book is about. And thank you guys. A lot of my success, I definitely grant towards my audience and my following. Partly because I think it's part of how my agent found me, which I talk about in my agent video, but also because you just guys, you gave me so much more confidence than I had in myself originally. And I know I shouldn't be like, oh, I got likes and follows, therefore I'm good at my job, but I just realized I was able to help other people. I knew enough that I could help others, and that is what gave me the confidence that I should be doing more. So thank you to everyone. I love you all, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.